For decades, Pierer Mobility has been an Austrian powerhouse behind some of the most iconic motorcycles in the world. But as with many empires, a rapid rise to greatness is often followed by a dramatic and unexpected fall. This is the story of Pierer Mobility. You might be more familiar with the brands KTM or Husqvarna, but let's take this from the beginning and the pieces should fall into place. In 1934, Hans Trunkenpolz opened a metalworking shop in Mattighofen, Austria. Little did he know, this modest venture would lay the foundation for one of the most iconic motorcycle brands in history. When Ernst Kronreif invested in the company in 1953, the name changed to Kronreif und Trunkenpolz Mattighofen, or KTM, and KTM produced its first motorcycle, the R100. The R100 was really a town bike that could be used for some light off-roading, but over the years KTM was synonymous with pure off-road bikes. KTM quickly recognized the power of motorsports to drive innovation and brand recognition. By the 1970s, KTM was a dominant force in motocross and enduro racing, winning numerous championships and pushing the boundaries of performance. Racing was in KTM's DNA. Every victory on the track translated into better bikes for the consumer. But success in motorsports was only one piece of KTM's strategy. The company continued to innovate, introducing groundbreaking technologies and expanding its product lineup. From around year 2000, adventure bikes and even naked road bikes became popular models, and bikes from KTM were now a common sight in all parts of the world. Around this time, a few mergers were made with a couple of purebred enduro racing companies originated from the north. This further established KTM as the leader in off-road racing. KTM acquired Husqvarna in 1995. Husqvarna was established in 1988 from the circumstances when then Husqvarna motorcycle division was sold to the Italian manufacturer Cagiva in 1987. In 2013, KTM also purchased Husqvarna, which had changed owner from Cagiva to BMW. Husqvarna is a well-known brand in off-road racing and was considered a good match to KTM's racing heritage. The Husqvarna brand was retired somewhere in 2014, however, and the models left from Husqvarna were now sold under the Husqvarna brand. When it comes to e-bikes, and here I mean this type of bikes, the history is short but also a bit complex. But in 2018, a partnership was made with German Pexco.
It was a very exciting day to see so many people around on our first press conference between Pexco and Husqvarna.
In this joint venture, the first proper Husqvarna e-bikes were manufactured, and they were indeed heavy-hitting enduro machines. I had the chance to ride a couple of them, and they did iron out the terrain effectively. Despite the fact that this frame is a bit dated, it practically chews challenging trails for breakfast. Top-level components, long travel, and a weight at around 25 kilos is part of that explanation. Pexco also manufactured and marketed Raymond e-bikes, but I am unsure if the brand was ever part of a KTM or Pierer Mobility. But from my mind, the company Pexco was incorporated to Pierer Mobility in 2019. Where Raymond bikes ended up is unknown to me, but they're not part of Pierer Mobility's official offering. In 2019, a large part of Spanish GasGas was acquired. GasGas is a dirt bike company with its roots in Trial. With this merger, GasGas, which was in serious financial difficulties, got access to much-needed cash and a global distribution network. A few years later, a couple of GasGas-branded e-bikes were introduced as well, making the most of the mountain bike boom that happened during the pandemic years. Another brand was purchased in 2021, the US-based Felt Bicycles, which was a bit surprising since Felt bikes mainly look like this, which has nothing to do with dirt bikes or EMTBs. Pierer Mobility has announced plans to sell Felt bicycles, but to this day they haven't succeeded. The last major purchase was in 2022, where KTM purchased 25% of the Italian motorcycle company MV Agusta. In 2024, KTM owned more than 50% of the company. When I say KTM, I really mean Pierer Mobility, which takes us further into the business side of things. Stefan Pierer is an Austrian engineer who started his career in sales at a heating and ventilation company. In 1987, he started an investment company, which took over KTM in 1992. Where the money came from, I don't know. Borrowed money, old money, or savings from his time as a sales manager at Hovel. Maybe all of the above. But in reality, he didn't need to raise that much money, since KTM was bankrupt. And at the time for the bankruptcy, KTM only employed 160 persons, which is a completely different number from what we see today. Pierer purchased a majority stake of KTM for 3.5 million euros. He managed to turn around many years of sales decline over the coming decade. The aim was set high, and along the way, Pierer Mobility said in a famous statement that they intended to become the third largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world, alongside Honda and Yamaha. Investments in new production research facilities were made, and in 2022, the sales figures had hit a whopping 2.4 billion euros. That number came from 375,000 sold motorcycles and over 100,000 bicycles. Stefan Pierer himself had managed to build his personal wealth to an estimated 1.6 billion euros, making him one of the wealthiest people in Austria, and the future couldn't be brighter. Right? Behind the scenes, this achievement naturally didn't come by itself. There were hurdles to overcome and a lot of hard work behind it. In 2023, despite the record result, the hurdles kept growing, which most likely related to future sales forecasts in a very similar fashion as with the bicycle industry. Something that was also recognized by the management. But knowing what we know today, reality hit even harder than anticipated and seemed to take Stefan Pierer and his team by surprise. As with many companies after the pandemic, several factors contributed to what is to become nothing less of a tragedy. Pierer Mobility suffered from component shortages, something that we saw in many industries, including the bicycle industry. But what really stands out in the press recent years are quality issues with some KTM models. Through numerous forums and Reddit threads, it can be read that many KTM owners are fed up with KTM motorcycles breaking down prematurely and that they moved on to more reliable brands. Even Italian brands such as Aprilia are considered more reliable than some KTM models. Much is blamed on camshaft problems with a few motors. The camshaft is meant to last the lifetime of any motor, and if it fails, it can lead to serious consequences and large costs for the owners. Often these failures happen after the warranty is expired, and KTM has been criticized for not taking their responsibility for obvious manufacturing and design faults. This leads us to China and the company CFMOTO. CFMOTO is a Chinese motorcycle brand with its own production facility. Pierer Mobility partnered with CFMOTO over a decade ago, and on paper it seemed to be a good match. Pierer Mobility could outsource some of the manufacturing to CFMOTO and also gain access to a huge Chinese market. CFMOTO, on the other hand, could eventually benefit from Pierer Mobility's distribution chain in parts of Europe for their products. Unfortunately, here is where cost-cutting turned into quality issues. There's a lot that can be said about the decision to put manufacturing in China and about the camshaft issues. But it's not only the cams that have been blamed for having poor quality. There are issues in other areas too, both mechanical and also with the electronics. These are issues on a large scale and has taken a huge impact on the brand KTM. Perhaps growth has been so important that the focus on quality has been neglected. Buyers are literally fleeing to the competition in masses. The camshaft issues is not affecting all KTM models though, but unfortunately the number of bikes that are affected is still huge. This is a build-up for a perfect storm. A rapid expansion with borrowed money seems to have been large contributors to the failing business, as with many other seemingly successful companies. The reality has hit Pierer Mobility when the interest rates hit the rapidly growing mountain of debt. The amount of debt seems to have increased significantly after the pandemic. I speculate that new debt was added to cover old debt. That's what usually happens. Combine all of this with a sales decline, which in absolute numbers is mind-boggling. An inventory of 130,000 motorcycles and e-bikes were unsold at the end of 2024. You might think that e-bikes are not important here when it comes to inventory value, until you see that some e-bikes cost more than motorcycles. I don't think the drop in sales figures only relates to quality issues. I think this is a post-pandemic pattern that we recognize from the bicycle industry, which has also suffered recent years. There seemed to have been a bike boom in general during the pandemic, which has left a vacuum. Uncertain personal financial expectations, in combination with increased inflation, are also factors that we see from many other industries as well, like in the automotive industry. The costs simply don't match the income any longer. Some say that the heavy investments in e-mobility, that's EMTBs and electric motorcycles, is to blame for the situation. But the efforts to scale the business in general has likely played a larger part.
We need a pit stop for the future. Today, we have decided to transfer KTM to a so-called legal restructuring proceedings with self-administration.
In November last year, Pierer Mobility filed for legal restructuring proceedings with self-administration. In layman terms, the company is bankrupt if it doesn't come up with a huge pile of money very quickly. This phase gives the company 90 days to negotiate with creditors before the company, most likely, will be sold. In January, Stefan Pierer stepped down as CEO to leave a new management the task to take the company to a new future, whatever that entails. There has been some wild rumors of what will happen with KTM and Pierer Mobility. Remember this guy, Formula 1 star Lewis Hamilton, BMW, Chinese investors, and Pierer Mobility's Indian partner, Bajaj, have been in the spotlight. In February 2025, a decision was made to not declare Pierer Mobility insolvent, and the bankruptcy has at least temporarily been avoided. The company has agreed to pay off 30% of its debt in May 23rd. That means 548 million euros is what the creditors will get, and that's it as far as I understand it. 30% seems like a low figure, but selling the company would only yield around 15%, which is of course a far worse option. This is the settlement in simplified terms, but the companies need around 800 million euros in total to be able to start production again. That money will come from existing shareholders and 7 investors, including CFMOTO and Bajaj. As mentioned, this is the simplified version, but there are other stakeholders and companies involved here in a complicated corporate web. Pierer Industry, which sits several layers above KTM AG and Pierer Mobility, is also being restructured with an approved 250 million euro financing. There are also settlements within the subsidiaries. The full settlement is difficult to overview since the company structure is so complex. Only a year ago, Pierer Mobility purchased MV Agusta from BMW. But in this process, MV Agusta is now in the hands of its original owners, the Cerdanya family. MV Agusta was relatively easy to divest, as there are no shared parts between the motorcycle models. This story is more than likely not over, and there's still a dark cloud hanging over Pierer Mobility. The company still has to prove that it can be financially sustainable in a very different market than what existed only a few years back. They also have to rebuild the trust with the customers when it comes to quality. June 2025. Production has been resumed, but there has been reports of component shortages again, which massively hurts the production. The components that were still left in stock is now used, and KTM struggles with the relation to their suppliers and subcontracting partners. The trust needs to be restored with these stakeholders too. The annual report was just recently released, which reveals a tragic result of over -1 billion euros. Other sad news is that the new mobility strategy is now put to rest. That means that Pierer Mobility pulls out of the e-bike and bicycle industry completely and focuses on conventional motorcycles instead. It's now a question of time to get the company going again before the funds from the settlement runs out. The next 6 months are very critical for the survival of Pierer Mobility, and we will most likely see other types of other settlements, investments, and perhaps new stakeholders. So far, it seems as if KTM, Husqvarna, and other European legacy brands will remain in Europe, which is something I see as very positive. I would hate the company becoming Chinese or Indian. You know, another piece of European history being taken over by foreign powers. That would probably be the nail in the coffin for many existing customers. Let's hope for the best, and let's hope that KTM and Husqvarna once again can thrive from its base in Austria.